Well, I want to welcome everybody back to the podcast today. And I'm excited because we're going to be sitting down with Eric and Katie, who are some of our newer long term missionaries about to head to the field long term for the first time with OMF. So I just want to start off by just saying thank you for taking the time to join me today and sharing your story.
We're honored to be here
Yeah,
today.
thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, it's a blessing. I've known you for a bit. I know a bit about your story. I don't know sort of the origin or the beginning of your stories. And I love to start at that point because I love the testimonies. I love to just hear how God's story has been unfolding in your life since you came into the world, and where you grew up, what was happening with your family, your community, the cultures that you guys grew up in. So whoever would like to start, please go ahead and bring us on this journey from where you began, and we'll lead all the way up to where you are today.
Yeah, I guess I can start, and then I think that I'll just sort of talk until Katie and I sort of join together in our journey.
You met? Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So I'm Eric Unruh. I grew up in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania my whole life. Actually, where we live right now is the same exact town that I was raised in. So it's kind of unique to be back here. And we live 2 minutes away from where we got married. So it's very interesting to be in the exact same place where all my earliest memories are. And I attended the church we got married at, same place that we lived so close to. It's an interesting place. I was blessed to be able to grow up into a Christian family and to have parents who gladly brought me to church and taught me the Word of God. Our first church that we went to was a Mennonite church. And around here, saying Mennonite church doesn't mean very much because there's such a wide range.
Yeah.
So, whatever you're thinking of a Mennonite church, you just have to go and check each individual church to know the beliefs. But it was a very tight-knit, small community, and I had a great experience as a young child before I ever really understood what I was even being taught in church. And it was great to have this community of believers that, even though I didn't fully understand why they loved each other the way that they did, I could tell that it was good. However, that church ended up going through a split after a change in leadership gone wrong. And so at a younger age, probably around 9 or 10, we actually changed churches and we started.
What year was this happening?
This would have probably been about 2005, 2006.
Okay, so I want our listeners to know give them a general age range of where you guys are.
Yeah, that is just wild once I say it out loud to think, oh yeah, 20 years ago. So when I was about 8 or 9, we ended up transferring to this new church. And so parallel to this, I was obviously attending school. I went to our local public school. I was really struggling in school, struggling to make friends, struggling to fit in. And so then the one community that I did have at this previous church ended up falling apart, and I was thrown into this new community of believers, and I just did not fit in there either. I didn't get along with the other kids my age. I felt very isolated. It was not a great time for growth. And still at this point in my life, I am thankful that my parents continued to teach me and to push me towards the truths of the word. But in no way would I say that I took my faith seriously. As I went through this time, there was just this desire in me. I was having a terrible time at school with bullying. So I had one single friend, though, at this church. And so, of course, when you have one friend, they're very influential to you, right? And so this one friend that I did make at this new church, he actually told me right as we were getting ready to transition from middle school into high school, that he was going to go to the local, like a Christian private school. So I heard this and I thought, well, okay, so you're my only friend right now and you're leaving to go to a different school. And so I thought, I got to follow you. I got to go. And what's funny is probably about 2 months later, after both of us had gone through the enrollment process of trying to get to this new school, he comes up to me and tells me, actually, I'm not going to be going anymore. And that was obviously tragic to me. But I tell all of this because I think that it's a really pivotal moment in my life. And I reflect on this and see how the Lord had worked through this. So, me as a shy, nervous, anxious kid who had just found out that my only friend at the time was not going to be going to this school, for some reason, I think that the Lord prompted me to go anyways. And so I actually decided, apart from my friend, that I was going to change schools anyways. I was going to start over from square one all over again. And I was going to go to this private Christian school. And I still am surprised that the Lord even gave me the courage to do that. But I'm very thankful for it
Mm.
because as I started my freshman year of high school, I had finally found a place to fit in once again. As I kind of felt when I was a child within that community of believers, I now had these teachers at this private Christian school who were investing in me and teaching me the ways of the Lord. And I started to really grow in my faith. And I started to finally understand what the gospel was. And so it's one of those things where I couldn't give you an exact date where I finally started to take my faith seriously. However, things do kind of take a change later on. So I mention that moment because it's such a pivotal time in my life to just see how
Sure.
God gave me the courage to go to this private Christian school and to then see how he nurtured me through the teachers that I had and the friends that I made. And I truly broke out of my shell. And yeah, as the time of high school started to reach an end, it was becoming time to decide what in the world I should do. At first, I was obviously conflicted, as everybody is, but I've always kind of leaned towards mechanical things and working with my hands. So my first choice, my first option of what I wanted to do was I wanted to go to Penn College of Technology to be an aviation mechanic. And so
Okay.
I had toured the school and everything, and I was all excited for it. And my parents were very encouraging about it, which I thought was very nice because they could have pushed me in whatever direction they had wanted. My father, he actually owned an insurance agency. He could have very easily pushed me into that field, but they pushed me to do what I wanted to do. However, when we went to tour that college, I felt so inadequate compared to every other student who was touring. And I thought, there is no way that I can do this whatsoever. And I completely shied away from it, even though my parents, again, pushed me. And yet again, I now reflect and I realize that these things in the moment that seemed trivial or as though they were decisions being made exclusively by me for my own intentions, I now see how the Lord used those. So after I went there, I decided, I don't want to lock myself down to that, to something I don't feel confident in. I'd prefer to do something more universal or something I can grow into. So I actually went to tour Messiah College and their business administration program. And so this was great because, again, it was interesting that the Lord was using my shyness and insecurity to actually push me into Christian education, which is kind of funny. So I went there, and this time I enrolled. I had a roommate. I was all set to go. And then about 2 months before I was ready to go to Messiah, I felt a very strange burden to go and to tour one other Christian university. And I don't even fully understand this to this day, why I felt such a tug. It was nobody telling me to do it, but there was a tug to go and visit Lancaster Bible College.
Mhm.
And so obviously Lancaster Bible College, it's the same place that I live now and have lived. But I went to tour Lancaster Bible College, and after I left there, I felt such a confidence in it that I decided, all right, I'm going to go here for business administration instead. My parents, as supportive as they had been through all of this, were very disappointed because they had already bought Messiah memorabilia and merch.
They're just making
But
a charitable donation. Come on.
yep. But so I went to Lancaster Bible College, and again, it was one of those situations where the circumstances surrounding it, my intentions were not particularly great. You know, it started with insecurity and kind of just the selfishness of wanting to have as many options as possible. You know, if you get a business degree, surely you can join a majority of companies. They always have a need for somebody with a
Yeah,
business
yeah.
degree. And my original intention was because this is serious, which is very ironic considering I'm sure what we'll get into later. I originally did not want to be a missionary. And I did not want to be in ministry. I wanted to go and be one of those Christians who went to Christian college. I went and got my business degree so I could make as much money as possible so that I could just give it to other Christians to go and do that work.
Yeah.
So, yes, I'm just being completely transparent with my intentions to show how the Lord could still use all of my negative intentions, whether it be my anxiety or my selfishness. And so, my first year of college, I was not taking things very seriously. And to be honest, towards the end of my high school days and really starting in my freshman year of college, I started to get very close with some very bad kids from my hometown, some of the few friends that I made outside of school. I started to spend less and less time with the friends that I was making at college. And even though I lived on campus, I was driving home more and more so I could spend time with these kids that had no relation to Christianity. And they started to drag me further and further away from the things that I was being taught at Lancaster Bible College, and further away from the faith that the Lord had been growing throughout high school and growing in college. And actually, my freshman year of college was probably one of the darkest times for me, as despite everything that the Lord had done me to lead me to this point, the decisions I was making did not reflect his graciousness that he had had upon me. So I was going back home on the weekends. I was smoking and drinking with them. It was as though, despite everything that the Lord was investing into me, I was just ignoring it. It all came to a head one night towards the end of my freshman year of college. It was one of the weekends when I was back home, and I had just spent a whole night just doing awful things with my friends. And I had come back home at 3 a.m. to my house while my parents were asleep, not knowing about any of this. And I went to the basement of my house and I just sat there and I just meditated on everything that I had just done. And I thought, what in the world has brought me to this point? I am so far away from what I had been taught. So I had just looked at these sins that I had just committed. And I had thought, how many sins did I have to commit to get to the point where I'm completely comfortable to be doing this with my friends every weekend? How many things had to build on top of this until I was so callous to my own sin that I'd feel completely comfortable every weekend to go and do worse than anyone at college would ever expect? And I sat there, and for the first time in my life, I truly felt completely and utterly broken by my sin. And I just cried because I had realized everything that the Lord had done for me up to this point. And I just thought, I've done so much against what I had been taught, whether it had been in that church that I grew up in, whether it had been in my high school that I went to, whether it had been getting into this college. I'd ignored all of it and pursued my own passions. So I just sat there crying, basically thinking, I've just condemned myself. What can I possibly do? I've completely and utterly ruined this life that God had been so gracious with. But it was in that moment that God had made it very clear to me, this is why I sent my son. This is why Jesus had to die. This message that you had ambiguously been listening to your whole life, you'd heard it time and time again, and it'd go in one ear and out the other. I finally understood, oh, it was only my sins that would have been enough for Jesus to have had to die on the cross. Just my sins would have made it so that the wrath of God would have utterly destroyed me had it not been for Jesus' sacrifice. And it was in that moment that I felt such an incredible amount of peace, a peace that I had never experienced any Sunday that I'd ever been at church, at any event. Through that peace, I decided, okay, if God would send his son to sacrifice himself for somebody who would screw up as much as I had, who would have all of this invested into him and throw it out and just pursue his own sin, if God would send Jesus for me, I'm going to dedicate my life to serving him. And from that day forward, and truly, I mean it, from that day forward, I dedicated my life to Christ and to truly repenting of my sins and following Jesus and putting my faith in him. And so that was the greatest turning point of my life. And it's really when I went from being the definition of a nominal Christian to somebody in love with Jesus and in love with following him. I was very thankful that that happened in my freshman year of college because I had 3 more years to try to redeem that time that I had had and the opportunity that God had blessed me with. And so,
Wow.
I'll kinda just let Katie share for a while, and then we can sort of talk about how our paths converged.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's beautiful. It's always interesting how as we sort of progress through life and think that we're heading down a path that I want to be, I want to do, I'm going to become this, and then you get to that point of understanding what it means to fully surrender in God. Um, and then I think you can start to look back and you go, all those eyes were actually God directing me, leading me, guiding me, brought me to the point of full surrender and being unified with Him in a unique way. That's your moment. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Love hearing that. Looking forward to the next stage in your life. But yeah, all right, Katie, you're up. Let's hear your story.
Yeah. So, my story, it has its similarities to Eric's, but not that many, to be honest. But it has some. So, I am not from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So, we're living very far from.
And everybody who is from there appreciates that you said it properly.
Yes,
You've lived
Lancaster.
here long enough.
So I went to Lancaster Bible College in my first month. Yeah, I was saying Lancaster, and they
Uh-oh.
are not okay with that. So
No.
I learned pretty fast. Probably not even a month. Probably my first weekend I learned. But yeah, I'm from Kissimmee, Florida. So down
Okay.
south. Yeah, and I grew up, yeah, similar to Eric, in a Christian home. We went to a Baptist church down in the South,
There you
Independent
go.
Baptist. Yeah, so classic. They're all over
Mhm.
Central Florida, all over the South, but Central Florida too. But yeah, I did grow up in a Christian home. Both my parents were actually from up here in Pennsylvania, and my dad had kind of done the opposite of me and had went to Florida for Bible college and stayed there. And so that's where me and all my siblings were born and raised.
Okay.
Yeah, and my earliest memories are of being at church. I went to a Christian school at my church, and we were pretty much there every day. All my earliest memories are at this church and this school. Whether it was from picking up my older siblings from school, or whether it was, with my parents serving different aspects of the church. But I would say my early years were definitely characterized, just surrounded by the Bible and by this church. And I remember hearing. I was probably 4 years old, and I heard in Sunday school, in church one day, about how Jesus died for me. And I still remember, like a day or two later, telling my mom in the church parking lot that I wanted to ask Jesus into my heart. And it was kind of what we were taught back then, and that's what I did. And I was 4. I don't know how much I really understood of my own sin and of what Christ really did, but I remember saying it then, and then very much growing into my faith and growing into understanding what Christ did for me, and who He really was. I will say though, growing up so surrounded by Christians and by church and by the Bible, I think it's very common to become very numb to the gospel. I mean, if it's something you hear every single day, pretty much every single day, Christ died on the cross for you. It's like, yeah, I get it. It's Jesus. It's what He does. Like, He dies for people. And that's just something, yeah, I heard. And I think I definitely became very numb to it up until my high school years. I remember reading in the book of Matthew. I was reading the crucifixion story in Matthew. And I don't really know how old I was. I just know I was in high school. And for some reason that day when I was reading the crucifixion story in Matthew, it really, I think, came alive what really happened on the cross and what Christ really did for me. I think I always had thought, it's just, yeah, He died on the cross. It was a Roman way of, punishing people. So in Matthew, it talks about how when Christ died, how the earth went dark for 3 hours, and there was earthquakes, and dead people rose from the tombs and walked again. And when I was reading this, I think it became Christ's death being very physical to seeing the spiritual side of things, to say that this wasn't just a man dying, but this was an entire event that was really happening. And I think God really, I don't know, revealed to me, thinking of why I chose to follow Jesus. It would be, He brings a peace that you can't get anywhere else, or a joy that you can't get anywhere else, or love, overflowing love, and all of these things. But I think when I was reading this story, it just became like, no, this God of the universe who created us came to earth as a man, lived perfectly, and died a very terrible death. And it wasn't just a man dying, it was God himself taking on the wrath of God for me. And I realized that even if we didn't get this love or joy or peace that comes with salvation, Christ would need to be worshiped and glorified forever, for every moment of my life. No matter what good things come with salvation, he would deserve to be worshipped anyways. And I think that kind of point in my life when I realized that how much he deserves, and how my sin put him on the cross, and not what he took on the cross. It was all of my sin that I had committed up until that point in my life, and of course all the sins in the future, plus every sin that was ever committed, that ever will be committed on this earth. To try to think of the amount of sin that was put on Christ that day is just you can't really fathom it. And I was trying to in that moment, and I couldn't do it. And I realized, what was put on Christ in that moment, it was, he deserves to be worshiped forever, and not just by me, but by all the people he created and all the people he died for. I think that was kind of a turning point to where, yes, I was a believer before, but at that point it was so much more real to me, and so much more of, there was something I needed to do about it, I guess I would say. This was, he needed me to glorify him, and he needs others to glorify him forever. And so that was kind of a turning point in my walk with the Lord, and how it got deeper from that point on. I would say, though, for the mission side of things, just to bring that in. So since I was a little girl, I think like 8 or 10 years old, I had a school teacher say we had to write a little paper about what we wanted to be when we grew up. And I had just read this book about a missionary kid in Africa, and she had a pet cheetah. It was not a real book. It was a fiction book. And she had a pet cheetah, and I thought, oh my goodness, I want that life. I want to be a missionary. And so since I was like 10 years old, that was what I wanted to be, specifically in Africa for whatever, because I wanted a pet cheetah, I guess. And, but of course, I grew older than 10, and I kind of learned a little bit more about missions and Africa. And and I think that was just the starting point. But I do think from there, the Lord really put in my heart a desire for intercultural ministry, for travel, for missions in general, especially from high school on. But I will say this, in like my junior or senior year of high school, I got the chance to go to Africa. I got the chance to go to Zambia on a mission trip.
Okay.
And I was so excited, because I was like, it's time. Like, I can go on a mission trip to Africa. This is where I've always wanted to go. And so I go, just for 2 weeks. I go to Zambia, Lusaka. And I was so surprised when I got there, because when I got there, there were so many Christians, Zambian Christians, and praise the Lord. It's a really great thing. And who we were with, they were doing great work. But I was sitting there when I got back, kind of like, why did I want to go to Africa my whole life? Why would I go and learn another language, and learn another culture, and go so far from my family, to tell people about Jesus, when there are Christians there that can tell them about Jesus much better than I can, that know their culture better, that already know the language. And so when I came back, I was kind of like, okay, maybe me becoming a missionary isn't the most effective thing I can do with my life. Maybe it's not the most, not where I can be used where I'm truly needed, or where I can be used to my greatest potential. And my family was actually quite surprised, because I had always been so interested in missions, and they were like, really, like right when it was time to go to college, I had changed my mind about what I wanted to do. And they were very surprised. But I was kind of obsessed with the idea of going where I would be most used, or going to where I could, use my gifts to the greatest I can, or my greatest capabilities. And so when I eventually chose a college and chose a major, I ended up going to Lancaster Bible College up in Pennsylvania, which is how I ended up here. But I initially chose a major for counseling. Addictions counseling is what I wanted to do. And I spent a year and a half in that major. But I think at some point I came to realize that I was very obsessed with being used the greatest I can, or going to a place in the world where I could be most used or most needed. And once I was in this counseling degree and taking some classes, I realized I don't know how good I would be as an addictions counselor. I had a brother who struggled with addictions most of my life, and ended up actually passing away when I was in college of a drug addiction. But it was after that happened, I realized maybe I'm not the best person to do this job, to counsel people with addictions, and maybe I am not that good at it. And I had this kind of crisis of where am I most needed? Where am I most needed? And I remember talking to a missionary couple that was at our college, and I was kind of talking to them about this idea of like, where are we most needed? And they were like, Katie, you can't always just go somewhere based on need. You have to go where the Lord wants you to go, and you have to go where you're called to go. And I think hearing that was it was hard for me at first, but as I kind of wrestled with the Lord with it, I realized, yeah, who am I to think that I should go where I'm most needed, where I can give the most of what I have to give, or whatever it is. And I realized that is way less important than going where the Lord would have me. So I ended up switching my major in college to teaching English as a second language, because I thought, I don't know if the Lord will still have me go into missions. I don't know if he'll have me stay in the States. But this is something that I can do either or with. Yeah, I kind of just ended it there, and I left it to the Lord. I kind of gave it back to the Lord and said, you can just do whatever you want with me, whatever you decide. It doesn't matter what I'm good at, or because I'm, in the end, where I think I don't have that many gifts to give in the grand scheme of things, and what the Lord can really do with his Spirit. He can do whatever he wants and whatever he decides to do with me. So I kind of gave it back to him. And that's when I met Eric, who really didn't want to be a missionary. And I actually thought when we met and when we were talking about marriage, I was like, I guess this is your answer, Lord. Like, I guess, missions isn't in the picture, because, that's not where you're leading Eric. And I actually told the Lord that I wouldn't be the one to bring missions up with Eric. So that way I knew it wasn't me pushing things. I was like, Lord, if we get married and you want us to go into ministry, just have it come from him. And it ended up coming from you.
Did you guys meet Eric when you were going through that year of struggle, or was that after?
After.
Okay.
It was like a little gift from God. Yeah, which I'm thankful for, because I wouldn't have wanted Katie to have dated me before I had decided to actually follow Jesus in my life and not just my words.
Yeah, so we worked at the college bookstore. We got a job there at the same time.
Okay.
And became friends. And
oh, that is such a boring way to tell that story. A year before we had ever done that, it was called Midnight Breakfast. It was a tradition at LBC. You have breakfast at midnight during finals week to encourage you to study all night. Nobody did that.
Study all night, get you to hang out.
Yeah. So I was in line with my dorm, and I look at them as I'm walking in, and I see Katie at the cash register kind of thing where you scan in.
I was working at that.
I saw her from afar, and I look at the guys in my dorm and I say, I'm going to marry her someday. And then I proceeded to not talk to her for about a year.
Yeah.
Like alpha.
That's the way to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we just so happened to get a job at the same time at the bookstore. Eric was probably so happy he finally had
God had a plan.
What year were you guys at that point?
So
you got
now
the job at the bookstore together?
I was going into my sophomore year. You were going into your junior year, right?
What was the year?
What year?
Yeah.
2016, 2017.
2017.
Somewhere in there. The years go by.
Yeah, they go by.
Okay.
So we met at the bookstore. We both coincidentally got to work there at the same time. So that's how we met. I guess before I would go forward, I would ask, would you like me to sort of transition into how we got called into missions?
Also, it didn't happen at the same time. It's separately.
I mean, it did kind of happen at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. As Katie and I started the date and as all that progressed, it kind of started to all work like clockwork. So Katie and I, we got married in 2019, and we got married a day after Katie graduated. I graduated 6 months before.
There you go.
It's a good idea.
Just start all the new things at once,
Yeah.
And I
why
figured
not?
you're soft Band-Aid.
Yeah.
But so one of the first things that Katie and I wanted to do when we were married was we really wanted to pray for an unreached people group. And we just thought that it would be a good discipline to do together. And so I assume that you know about the Joshua Project, but for anybody who doesn't, they make a lot of statistics regarding Christianity and numbers and people groups.
Yeah, this is a
So
website online that you can access and find out data on the state of Christianity throughout the world.
So we had gone on there and we had looked up just the top largest unreached people groups. And when we pulled this up, it made a lot of sense to us because the countries on there are, and the peoples on there, are a lot of places that are either, facing heavy persecution, some places in the Middle East where it's completely illegal to be a Christian or to even own a Bible, or it's places like Papua New Guinea with hundreds of local languages. And so a lot of that made sense until we looked at number 2. And number 2 was Japan. And so we had actually decided that we were going to pray for Japan. And we specifically, because we were looking at Japan and we were asking ourselves, wait a second, compared to everything else, Christianity is legal there. They have the Bible in their language. They have churches. They even have a missionary visa or religious visa, as we've come to find out. So even then, we knew those things, and we realized, unlike these other places that, maybe there are more practical needs, like Bible translators need to go to Papua New Guinea. We saw this and we realized the only thing that they really need is prayer for a movement to happen. So we decided to pray for Japan. And I'll sort of get back into that. But would you like to talk about what happened before we got called into OMF's?
Oh, sure.
ministry?
So,
Just real quick,
after,
if we're doing this timeline-wise.
yeah, so during our first year married, we got married, December of 2019. I think COVID hit a few months later, 2 or 3 months later. And I'll just say we were both very unsatisfied in our jobs, in our work at that time. I think a lot of people were, with the pandemic hitting the world. But we were really just praying to see what the Lord would have for us. And we thought maybe it'd be ministry in the States. We just really didn't know. One day, I just remember Eric coming home and being like, Katie, we should go. He was talking about this time he heard a professor back at college, and it was a human resources professor. It wasn't like a Bible professor or a missions professor. And he had mentioned that when he was a kid, he lived on a ship, a Christian book ship.
Okay. Yep.
And
I had just completely forgotten about this moment from college. It was just during his professor introduction on the first day. Mentioned it for like 20 seconds. God had packed that away until this moment that Katie and I were praying, Lord, we have no idea what you want us to do, but we're going to pray that you would just make it clear.
Yeah, and he brought that moment back to Eric's mind. And so Eric brought it up to me. He's like, I wonder if there's still that Christian book ship in the world. And so we literally typed into Google Christian book ship, and we found OM International, which is another mission organization. And they do have a ship, now 2 ships, but at the time they had one called the Logos Hope, which is kind of what we said. It's a ship that travels around the world selling Christian literature and Bibles in countries that don't really have access to.
Yeah, very, very neat ministry that they do. And we are often mistaken for them.
Yes, right. OMF, yeah. So
That's
it
the
was
main thing as we transition.
And so at this time, we had been married less than a year, a few months really, when we decided, hey, why don't we, well, it was Eric's idea. Yeah. He was like, why don't we try and go? Like, why don't we see if this is something the Lord has for us? And it was only 2 years. So for us, it was very, there wasn't this long-term commitment. It was something, we didn't own a house. We didn't have children. It was, why not go now? We don't really have anything to lose.
Well, yeah. And as Katie said, and I think it's an important point to emphasize, Katie had submitted her desire to become a missionary, and she had prayed to the Lord before she ever got married that if she was ever going to go into missions, that it would have to be me who would bring it up. Mm-hmm. So I came home one day after we had been praying about God leading us into this. And the one thing that I wanted to mention, because things will change as we talk more about Japan, in terms of getting called to the ship, when we went to the ship, we knew what the Bible had said about missions because we know what the Great Commission is. And we know that all believers are called to go and make disciples of all nations. So when I first brought this up, we went and looked into the ministry to figure out exactly what they were doing.
Yeah.
And we found out, they are a part of the Great Commission. And so we know what God's call is in Scripture. So what we actually prayed for then was that God would guide us through open and closed doors.
Yeah, he would just shut all the doors if this is something he didn't want us to do.
Yeah, exactly. It was almost as though we were praying, if it's not your will, if you're not calling us here, then please make it clear and shut this.
Yeah.
And he didn't. Yeah. All the doors were opened. And yeah, after 1 year married, we went and lived on board the ship for 2 years. Yeah. And
Yeah.
it was
That's
an amazing
cool. What were
experience.
you guys doing and where were you going?
Well, we went all around the world. We went from the Caribbean to West Africa to North Africa to Europe to the Middle East. And I mean, the Logos Hope brings Christian literature all around the world.
Yeah, so in the midst of that, we also had our roles on board the ship. So I worked as a travel coordinator, so kind of handling all the travel for people coming to the ship, as well as then becoming the finance manager. So handle all the finances of the ship itself and the crew members' kind of accounts, and as well as the bookstore's finances. So.
And then I worked in the engine room. I started as an engine watchkeeper, then I became the plumber, and then I became the engine training officer. But yeah, very interesting ministry, very great ministry. But
You were
we
also
mentioned
involved
that-
in that at a difficult time with COVID.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we had quite the adventure. When we first joined, the ship was not actually open to the public. It had been closed for quite a time before we joined. And when we joined, the book fair was closed. So a lot of our ministry, we would leave the ship, and sometimes we would have book fairs kind of on shore for people to come to, but they couldn't come on the ship. But we saw the ministry slowly open until the end of our time. There was sometimes thousands and thousands of people that would be on board every day. But yeah, at one point, we did get COVID on the ship a few times, and at one point we were stuck in our tiny cabin for 16 days.
Our cabin under the waterline with no windows.
So it was an interesting time to be to be traveling to different countries, which all had different rules regarding COVID. It was a very, very interesting time to travel. But yeah, we're very grateful for that time. And during this time,
well, let me
explain. Better explain.
It's just because once well, no, it's not even that. It's because I screwed up the timeline earlier a little bit. Yeah, the ship is a very important part in this, which will become very clear in a minute. But the ship is actually a part of our testimony to how we got called to Japan. So before the ship, at the very beginning of our marriage in that first year, we had been praying for Japan. And it started with us we were just praying for Japan in general. Eventually, we went on to go and to search. And one thing, a clarification, we were specifically praying for Hokkaido and Sapporo because we saw how few churches there were in Hokkaido, and we wanted a specific name to pray for. So eventually we were even looking up church names in Sapporo that we could be praying for. What was the church that we did find?
Sapporo Christian Group.
Sapporo Christian.
Found a small church just to have a name to pray for.
And we found a missionary that we started to email back and forth with and ask, how can we be praying for you? So as we were praying for Japan, God was slowly softening our hearts and just aligning our will to his for Japan. So eventually the inevitable question was going to come into our minds. Should we become missionaries to Japan? But it's pretty funny because at that moment, we absolutely shut that down and were filled with a bunch of insecurities about it. We don't know the language. The American culture is considered so different from the Japanese culture. We basically said, we're just going to keep praying for Japan. God's not telling us to go to Japan. We'll just keep praying for them, though. So we go to the ship instead, I guess. And we continue to pray for Japan. We were blessed to have some Japanese Christian crewmates. And we shared with them our heart for Japan, and they got to share just incredible insight to being a Christian in Japan. And everything sort of changed one morning. It was a Sunday morning, and we had church on the ship. Katie and I were having an off week, so we decided we were going to skip church.
Terrible missionaries.
Yeah, at that time, we lived about 50 feet away from the church. One staircase down the ship into the gathering hall. But after church, there was an event held called the Least Reached Prayer. And usually it's very low attendance, maybe 20 people out of the 300 crew. But for some reason, Katie, after I had decided to skip church with her, brought up, hey, do you want to go to this? I'm like, I guess we should. So we went, And there was one Japanese crew member who was leading it, and he was the one person we had never talked to. And he was leading a presentation about a least reached nation, Japan. And so it was a PowerPoint presentation on the need for missions in Japan. And as he started this PowerPoint, each of his individual slides were very clearly and specifically addressing very specific anxieties and insecurities that we had had and doubts about going to Japan. So, for example, one of his slides was, so you don't speak Japanese. Well, don't worry. Many people in Japan speak English. Many people want to learn English. And so it can be a great way to lead certain people to you. Or you're worried because you're a foreigner. Well, don't worry. That's a great way to stick out. And it's just another opportunity for ministry. And I even remember Katie used to pray when we were going through that time of especially heavy doubt about becoming missionaries there. She prayed, God, if you ever wanted us to become missionaries to Japan, you're just going to have to send a Japanese person to tell us to go. So he's up in front of us and he says, so if you've ever considered doing missions in Japan, please come. And,
you guys are looking around the room.
Yeah.
So he ended his presentation, though, by saying this. He said, I have been on the ship for 6 months now, and I came with one purpose in mind. I wanted to find other believers who would come back with me to serve in Japan.
Oh, wow.
He said, in the 6 months that I've been here, I haven't found a single person interested, which was just a knife to Katie and I.
Yeah.
And so after that, we had prayed for Japan. We stopped the presentation portion and went to praying. And as we'd sort of wrapped up and everybody was ready to go to lunch, Katie and I were just sitting there with tears in our eyes because it was made very clear in that moment that this was where we were supposed to go. But I'll let Katie explain even more so why it was so interesting.
How the Lord kind of worked it. So this man's name is Eki Endo, and he was from, not just from Japan, but he was from Hokkaido.
Of course.
The place we were praying for. He was from Sapporo, the city we were praying for. And the church we were praying for, he didn't attend the church, but he did know of the church, and he had been there a few times and had friends that attended the church. So we were telling him all of this.
And the missionary that we were praying
for. Oh, the missionary we were praying for. Yeah, Eki knew this missionary. He had worked with his father because his father was a pastor. And so it was like every single thing we were praying for, God found the one Japanese man who was kind of connected to all of our prayers. And so we knew if we didn't attempt to go to Japan now, we would just be disobeying.
You didn't go back to your rooms and be like, God, it's just not clear enough.
It's like, it's not. Yeah. He was very gracious to us, and we really wanted him to be clear, and he was gracious in giving us that.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was very different from the ship, where the ship was, we were praying, we know what the call is. It's the Great Commission. Now just, tell us not to go. And this was a very specific call that before this point, we weren't even sure if we knew that those happened. And then God, again, found the one person out of 7 billion to go and answer our prayer.
That's incredible. Okay, so it's all lining up. What's happening next? You're not still on the ship. How did all this stuff come about?
Yeah, so we left the ship 2 years ago now, a little over 2 years ago. And we, even when we were still there, right before we left, we actually started our initial application for OMF.
What? But how'd you find OMF?
So Eric, you can.
Oh, you're probably remembering
looking for, of course, after this call is kind of like, okay, what next? What do you do next? And we were looking for a mission organization, not just in Japan, but in northern Japan, in Hokkaido, the place where we were praying for, just because that was important to us. And it turns out Eki Endo, this Japanese man we met, his mom taught for the language school, the OMF language school in Sapporo. And it turns out the man we were emailing back and forth, I can't remember his name. I tried to look it up while we were talking, which is bad. But the man we were emailing back and forth about his coffee shop in Hokkaido was an OMF missionary. And that's kind of too bad. I'll have to look up his name later. But he was an OMF missionary. And he had actually encouraged us if we were interested in missions in Japan. He sent us a link to OMF. And then through other circumstances, other people, and like my sister, people in our life had kind of mentioned OMF to us. And so, it's just put in our path a few times. And
It
so
ran parallel to a lot of our
Yeah.
prayers. And I don't think I emphasized it well enough, but we have specifically been praying for Hokkaido and Sapporo
Yeah.
for over 5 years
Yeah.
now. And so
almost present really has a presence in those areas. So we really just prayed over it, and we really appreciate the vision and the mission of OMF. And so that's kind of how we decided to apply for OMF. And
Well, I'm glad you have such clarity on it. If you were sitting here saying we're still not really sure, that'd have been really frustrating. At
Yeah,
this point.
right.
anything would have done.
yeah. So yeah, we've been in the process to go for the last kind of 2 years. There's a lot you have to do before going. with
Yeah,
the
explain that.
application
What's that? What
process.
has that been like? Because people, I'm sure people would wonder what is that point where you're okay. I'm thinking this is OMF. What are
Mhm.
the stages in the process and actually getting to where you guys are, where you're soon to depart?
Right?
It was nice. Even when we were on the ship, when we first submitted a preliminary application, they immediately connected us with a coach. It was Mike McGinty. If anyone who's listening to this knows him, I'm sure many people do. So immediately, Mike McGinty, he was a field leader for a time
Yeah, he had
in
lived
Japan.
many years in Japan.
So immediately they connected us with somebody who had more information and experience in the potential interested field, which was very surprising to immediately have that connection.
Mhm.
So he had spent some time trying to field us, understand, how God had called us to this point, understanding what we were thinking ministry would look like, and walking us through that. It was great. Eventually, he led us into going and doing the formal application process. After the formal long application and the preliminary interviews, we were accepted to candidate course.
Which I don't know if that is the same one anymore, but
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, was that changed?
We
Yeah, there's some nuances to it. It exists, but in a smaller form, in person, and yeah.
The candidating process.
so we
Yeah.
went out to Colorado, right, to meet. Well, yes, we met you and some other people, and to kind of to get to know OMF more, for you guys to get to know us better, and see if both of us would be a good fit with each other. After that came
Yeah, well, at the candidating, we kind of got that home side approval to say OMF USA says, yeah, you guys should continue on this process. And so then you have to go, they say that there are 4 clearances: home side clearance, field clearance. They both have to sort of vet you and make sure that God is truly preparing you for this.
Yeah.
Then you have your health clearance and you have your financial clearance.
And so the last year, we have been in our partnership development phase, which is finding people in our community who will partner with us, give to us, pray for us, so that we can, have a team of people back here for who to kind of support us as we go to Japan. And so we just finished our partnership development section, or time, I guess I should say.
And
before we go, so.
and God's provided 100% of your support.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
In very good time.
And in the last year, by the way, congratulations. We're excited for you that you're getting ready to depart.
Yes.
You also had an extra
Yeah.
family member come along.
Oh,
Yes,
yeah,
we
we
did.
haven't once mentioned.
We also have a baby who's turning 1 tomorrow. So he's 1.
Sorry,
With Dad.
that sigh was because just before we had started the podcast, I was telling Rodney how much dread I feel about him turning 1. I love this age.
Yeah. So we'll be bringing Cyrus, his name. We'll be bringing Cyrus along with us.
That's
to
terrible.
Japan. That we forgot to mention.
Yeah.
Oh, don't worry. He won't listen to this for like 20 years.
Can you edit that earlier?
That's funny. Yeah. So we did have a child during our partnership development phase too, which has been an amazing thing.
I think it's 3 months and you're leaving, right?
Yes. So 3 months before we
End
We
of
are
June is our goal.
flying out of the U.S. and heading to Japan.
Okay, so the joining OMF, going through the partnership development phase, meeting people who would potentially pray and support over your ministry that you're going into. When you finally made that decision, we're all in, we're going long term. Family, friends, what was that experience like? Church community, was it supportive? Yeah, how did all that unfold?
Well, it helped a lot that we were coming from a previous ministry. because
Mhm.
I'm sure a lot of people who are new to partnership development, one of the things that they'll get a lot when they're going and sharing with people is a lot of questions about qualification. I remember our first time around raising support for the ship, people would ask you questions, whether it would be, how would you go and give the gospel to somebody from a foreign culture? Or, what kind of biblical education do you have? But this time around, we got to return to a lot of our previous supporters, and they got to see the work that the Lord did through the ship ministry. And they were far more just ready to accept us in our new ministry, knowing that they wouldn't go if God didn't call them.
Yeah, and so, but as well for our family and friends. So again, yeah, we were out of the country for 2 years. So I think it wasn't surprising to
Yeah.
our family and friends that we're gonna stay on the field or we're gonna leave again. For my family, a few of my siblings are in ministry, and my sister lived overseas, so it was a little bit easier for them to kind of come to terms that yeah, we would be living elsewhere. For Eric's parents, they're very excited for us. But I think it's very hard, to say goodbye, especially now that they have a 1-year-old grandchild.
Yep.
It's not easy to part with. We live 5 minutes from
Don't
them right
remind
now.
them, they might listen to this.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing to say goodbye. But they know the call that the Lord has given us, and I think that call doesn't just come to the people who are going. I think it's also to the people that are left behind, in a sense that the Lord is calling your parents to send us well, I think.
To release their children.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
so we are very grateful that our community around us, our church, are all very supportive. We are not ignorant of the fact that a lot of people don't have that same
Yeah.
experience when they go. So we're very grateful.
That's beautiful. I remember, so when we left, my wife Amanda and I left for Thailand. That was in 2006.
hmm
And we had our first daughter, Michaelin, and she was just a little over a year old.
Wow.
And that was hard, leaving
Yeah.
family, friends. But just recently, I was with my mom, or actually, she was over here at the house visiting, and she had mentioned what a joy it's been to walk with us through that journey and she's been a Christian my whole life, amazing Christian woman. That move allowed her the opportunity to travel the world and see things she would have never have seen before, coming and visiting us. And
Right.
the grandbabies as we had more kids down the road. And being that experience, she was with me many times. She visited us in Thailand. She actually did a backpacking journey with me through Myanmar. All these wonderful little experiences I got to share with her that she looks back at now, and she's just so grateful, as hard as it was,
Right.
saying goodbye, sending off my children, my first grandbaby with them. But yeah, it's
Wow.
cool to see how God works all that out.
Yeah. Right.
It's
Right. That is
encouraging.
encouraging. Yeah.
Although you're also setting a high standard. I'm going to have to take them on backpacking,
There's a lot of places and a lot of islands you can visit.
Yeah.
Put her on the bullet train. It's all going to be good. That's an experience. So very cool. Well, this is great. As we kind of wrap this up and you look back at how God's story has unfolded in your lives over the years to where you are today, are there any last words of wisdom or something you want to pass on to our listeners as you're looking back at how God's worked in your whole life up to the point where you're about to depart? This is the year 2025. You're heading out this summer to become full-time, long-term missionaries in Japan. You're looking at it. What would you like to leave our listening audience with?
I would encourage people if they're kind of seeking, what the Lord has for them, or what He wants them to do. I think one thing that has been such a big part of how the Lord has led us and provided for us is prayer. To truly seek Him out in prayer and to pray for the world, to pray for the unreached nations. And I believe that through prayer, the Lord really will guide you in what He has for you.
And I would add on to that to say, pray boldly and pray specifically. Do not pray as though you don't actually believe that the Lord can answer that prayer. We had been praying for a very specific place, and God sent a very specific person to go and to answer us very specifically. And I think so often people praying for other nations pray so generally that if God were to answer their prayer, they would almost never know. because it's such a general answer.
Hmm.
So pray boldly and specifically, and trust that the Lord can still answer that if it's His will.
Yeah, amen to that. And again, thank you guys for taking this time to share your story. It's beautiful. It's wonderful to see again how God's been working in your lives over all these years. There's going to be many more stories ahead as you continue into the chapters of life that are before you, and being able to look back at one point down the road and just again saying, God did this, God did this, God did this, God did this. That's wonderful. By the way, I wouldn't be surprised, as you've surrendered yourselves to the Lord and followed His way, that if you end up in some type of a bookstore ministry in Japan, because it seems to be a theme in your lives.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, we'd be okay with that.
Well, again, thank you guys for joining us. It's been a blessing and a privilege to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks for having us.
To learn more about OMF, visit us at omf.org/US.